Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to talk about the Homeowners Association that wants me to evict my wife. The Homeowners Association gave me 48 hours to evict my own wife from the house I bought before I could legally drink. By the time the timer they invented ran out, they were the ones getting a knock on the door from people with actual badges and actual authority. This all started because of a beige fence panel and a nosy man with a clipboard. At least, that's what I tell myself when I'm trying to find the funny side. My name's Rylan. I bought my little two-story place in a subdivision called Willow Ridge when I was 22, back when the market wasn't totally impossible, and I still thought HOA meant helpful neighbors who like landscaping. I lived there solo for almost 7 years, dutifully paying dues and repainting the trim when they told me the shade of white I chose was too creamy. Then I met my wife, Isla. I met her in the least dramatic place possible, a hardware store. I was arguing with a shelf label about whether the bracket I needed was actually in stock. She was 2 aisles over, talking to an employee who looked like he was about to quit on the spot because she needed a weird size of copper pipe. We both reached for the same roll of painter's tape in the checkout line, made one of those stupid jokes about fighting for it. And 10 minutes later, we were sitting in the parking lot comparing renovation horror stories. A year after that, Isla moved in. We got married quietly at the courthouse. A month later, we had a backyard party with friends and grilled too many burgers. I put up string lights even though the HOA's architectural committee probably had opinions about it. Everything felt good and normal. Then the notices started. First, it was a letter about Isla's car. Unauthorized vehicle, it said in bold at the top, like her 10-year-old blue sedan was a tank. There's a rule in our covenants about no overnight street parking without HOA approval. But her car was in our driveway, not in the street, not on the grass, not blocking a hydrant, just parked. I emailed back thinking it was a mistake. Hi, this vehicle belongs to my wife who lives here with me. The car is in our driveway, not the street. Please advise. I got a reply from the property management company signed by someone named Todd on behalf of Willow Ridge Owners Council. Per HOA rules, all residents and vehicles must be registered. Your spouse is not on file as an approved resident. Please submit the attached occupant application and $75 processing fee. Failure to do so within 10 days will result in fines. Attached was a PDF that wanted everything short of Isla's blood type: social, employment, prior addresses, criminal history authorization. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, mentally measuring how fast this situation could spiral. Isla read the email over my shoulder and laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like a sharp exhale. Approved resident? She said. They know you own this place, right? It's not an apartment complex. I pulled out the original HOA covenants from the binder in my office. I'd read them a few times over the years, mostly to make sure I wasn't accidentally violating some weird rule about lawn ornaments. There was a section about tenants and leases needing HOA approval. Absolutely nothing about an owner's own spouse needing to apply to live there. I emailed Todd back, attached screenshots of the relevant pages, and said, "My wife is not a tenant. She is a co-occupant of the home I own. There is no requirement in the CC and Rs that an owner must seek approval for a spouse to live in their own property. I will not be providing you with her social security number or paying a processing fee for the privilege of living in our own house. Please correct your records." I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. 2 weeks later, a new letter showed up. This one was hand-delivered, folded into a clear plastic sleeve and taped to our front door like some kind of suburban summons. Subject: unauthorized occupant 48-hour notice of violation. That header is burned into my brain. The letter was signed by the president of the HOA herself, someone I'd never met face-to-face, but had heard plenty about, Lorraine. Everyone in Willow Ridge knew who she was. The rumor mill said she'd been there since the first model homes went up. She was the type of person who knew all the bylaws by paragraph number and had opinions about the shade of your mulch. I took the letter inside and read it at the kitchen counter while Isla sliced tomatoes for dinner. I said, "You might want to hear this." She wiped her hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter next to me. I read it aloud. "Dear owner, it has come to the attention of the Willow Ridge Owners Council that an individual identified as Isla has been residing at your property without proper authorization." I actually had to stop and reread that sentence because of how weird an individual identified as Isla sounded. As per the association's occupancy policies and Amendment 4 to Article 6, All adult occupants must be submitted for approval. Failure to obtain approval constitutes a material breach of the governing documents. You are hereby given 48 hours from receipt of this notice to remove the unauthorized occupant from the premises. Failure to comply will result in immediate imposition of fines at $250 per day, suspension of common area privileges, referral to legal counsel for enforcement, including but not limited to seeking injunctive relief and removal of the unauthorized occupant. At the bottom, in bold, your prompt action to evict this unauthorized occupant is required. I finished reading and just stared at the page. My brain stuck on that word, evict. I could feel my blood pressure in my ears. Evict? Isla said slowly. Evict? Apparently, I said. I married an unauthorized occupant. She took the letter out of my hands. They can't do this. They can't tell you to get your wife out of your own house. Yeah, I said. They absolutely can't, and even if they somehow thought they could, they definitely can't do it in 48 hours. My first reaction was irritation. That buzzing, itchy feeling you get when someone oversteps in a small way, but it's not worth a full meltdown. But as I stood there, listening to Isla breathing beside me, that irritation settled into something else, a cold, focused kind of anger. Because here's what this letter actually said once you stripped off the fake legal tone. A group of neighbors thought they had the right to decide whether the person I loved was allowed to live in my home. They wanted access to her private information. They thought they could intimidate us into compliance with threats of fines and vague referral to legal counsel. They were messing with the wrong, boring homeowner. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm that guy who reads all the fine print. I read every word of the mortgage before I signed it. I read the entire HOA packet when I first moved in, highlighter in hand. I knew enough to know this letter was nonsense, but I also knew enough to know you don't just yell, "This is nonsense," and ignore it. You document. You respond. You make a record. So I did exactly that. First, I scanned the letter and saved it in a folder I labeled HOA Nonsense on my desktop. That folder would later become a small digital library. At the time, it just had the one resident. Then I went to the county property records website and pulled up my deed. It listed me and only me as the owner of record. No mention of a limit on who could live with me, no lease, no occupancy permit requirement. Next, I dug back into the CC and Rs. I read every line of Article 6. There was an Amendment 4, but it was about leased properties, landlords renting out their homes. It said tenants had to submit a lease to the HOA, and the board could deny tenants in very narrow circumstances. Again, nothing about an owner's spouse needing approval. I wrote another email. This one I sent to Todd at the management company and to the generic and board at Willow Ridge owner's address listed in the back of the covenants. Dear Willow Ridge Board, I am in receipt of the attached 48-hour notice, demanding that I evict my wife Isla from my home. Your letter cites Amendment 4 to Article 6 as authority. That amendment applies expressly and only to leased properties and tenants, not to owner-occupied homes. I am the sole owner of my address. My wife is not a tenant. She is my spouse and resides here with my full permission. There is no provision in the CC and Rs or bylaws granting the association authority to approve my spouse or to limit my right to have my family live in my own home. Additionally, demanding that I evict my spouse within 48 hours is patently unreasonable and not remotely supported by any statute or case law. You are attempting to interfere with my property rights and my marital relationship based on a misreading or intentional distortion of the governing documents. Effective immediately, I demand that you rescind the 48-hour notice in writing, confirm that no fines will be imposed, remove any requirement that my spouse submit her social security number and other sensitive personal data for approval. If you persist in this course of conduct, I will have no choice but to consult legal counsel and explore all available remedies, including a complaint for breach of fiduciary duty and violation of my rights as a property owner. Regards, Rylan. I hit send. I felt a little better, not good, but better. Then I did something that turned out to be way more important than I realized in that moment. I walked across the street to talk to my neighbor, Harlan. Harlan was a retired electrician in his 70s with a quiet way about him and a Labrador that moved slightly faster than he did. He had a ramp installed up to his front door the year before after a surgery. The HOA had pestered him about aesthetic uniformity until he produced a note from his doctor and a printout about accessibility laws. He'd shrugged it off when he told me about it back then, like it was just another thing old guys had to deal with. but I remembered the sour look on his face. That night, I showed him the letter. He read it with his mouth pressed into a line. "They're really losing it," he said. "You know they tried to tell me I had to remove my ramp unless I agreed to pay them to design a community-approved alternative? Like I should pay extra to make it harder to get into my own house." "Can they actually do that?" I asked. He snorted. "Not legally. I talked to my niece. She's in law school. She said something about fair housing and disability accommodation. Once I pushed back hard enough, they backed off. But they don't stop until you push." We sat on his porch and traded stories. He told me about how the board had changed over the years, with Lorraine slowly collecting power like it was a hobby. There used to be more reasonable people on it, but they'd moved away or burned out. "You talked to Penny yet?" he asked. "Penny?" I said. "2 doors down from you. The townhome with the red wreath on the door." I shook my head. "They're on her too. She's got a teenage son, Dev, who likes to shoot hoops in the driveway. They sent her some letter about nuisance noise because the ball thumps. Apparently basketballs are a threat to property values now." Harlan's eyes went back to my letter. "They think you're an easy mark because you've always complied. You keep your lawn nice. You paint when they tell you. You don't make waves." He looked up at me. "You're entitled to your peace, but this is them stepping into your house. That's different." That was when something clicked in my head. I had been the quiet, compliant homeowner. I'd grumbled about the paint color memo, but I'd repainted. I'd rolled my eyes at the email about holiday decorations, but I'd taken down the extra string of lights they said was excessive. This wasn't about grass height or ornament limits anymore. This was my marriage, my home, my right to decide who lived under my roof. "I'm done being the easy mark," I said. "Good," Harlan said and clapped me on the shoulder. The next morning, I woke up to 2 new emails. One was from Todd. The other was from Lorraine herself. Todd's wasn't terrible, at least not by comparison. It said they were reviewing my concerns with the board and reminded me that failure to comply with occupancy policies could result in enforcement action, blah blah. Lorraine's was worse. "Rylan, per board authority, all adult occupants must be screened for the safety and security of the community. While you may believe your spouse is exempt, the board must treat all occupants equally. Your belligerent tone in challenging a standard procedure is concerning. The association has broad discretion to regulate occupancy to protect property values. If your spouse has nothing to hide, I cannot imagine why you would obstruct a simple application. The 48-hour deadline stands. Lorraine, President, Willow Ridge Owners Council." My belligerent tone consisted of pointing out what the governing documents actually said and refusing to hand over my wife's social security number to some neighbor I'd never met. If that was belligerent, I could only imagine what she'd call what I was starting to feel now. Isla read the email and shook her head. "If you have nothing to hide, that phrase should be illegal," she muttered. We both worked from home. She did design work for small businesses. I did remote IT consulting. That day, neither of us got much done. Between emails, I kept diving into blogs and articles about HOA overreach, property rights, fair housing laws. The more I read, the more I realized just how thin the ice under the HOA's skates actually was. Around noon, I got a text from an unknown number. "This is Penny next door. Harlan said the board sent you something crazy about your wife. You okay?" I texted back, "We're fine, just angry. How did you know?" She replied, "I'm on their bad kid list because my son exists. I've started a small underground of people they irritate. You want in? Come by after 5. We have cookies." Around 5:30, Isla and I walked over. Penny was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a streak of blue in her hair and a no-nonsense expression. Her son Dev was lanky and polite, nodding at us and disappearing upstairs with a laptop as soon as we came in. On Penny's coffee table were 3 folders labeled Basketball Nonsense, Ramp Saga, and Parking Drama. She waved at them like they were party decorations. "I keep a paper trail," she said. "If they're going to harass me, we're going to have matching stationery." We shared our letter with her. She read it, eyebrows climbing higher toward her hairline. "They want you to evict your wife," she said. "Evict, as in your actual wife, whose name I'm pretty sure is on your mailbox?" "She's apparently an unauthorized occupant," I said. Penny looked at Isla. "Congratulations, you're contraband." We spent an hour swapping stories. Penny had gotten nuisance letters about Dev's basketball, about the noise from his keyboard when he practiced piano, about the fact that she sometimes hosted his study group and there were too many cars in front of her unit. Harlan arrived halfway through, bringing a plate of brownies and an accordion file of his own. He'd been saving every letter he'd gotten about his ramp, his trash cans, even the color of his porch light. "This board has been sliding downhill for a while," Penny said. "It used to be reasonable. Then Lorraine got herself elected president and started recruiting people who think common sense is a brand of fertilizer." "Can we vote them out?" Isla asked. "Technically, yeah," Penny said. "There's a process to recall the board or elect new members, but they've been really good at doing things at weird times, and normal people don't want to spend their Tuesday nights arguing about trash can placement, so they just keep getting reelected." We sat in silence for a second. "I don't just want to vote them out," I said. The words came out before I fully thought them. "I want them to understand they can't do this, not just to us, but to anyone." My phone buzzed while we were still there. New email. This time from a different address. Legal at Willow Ridge owners. I opened it, read it, my jaw tightened. "What now?" Isla asked. "They escalated," I said, handing her the phone. The email was from Association Counsel, some law office I'd never heard of. It referenced the 48-hour notice, declared I was in material breach of the CC&Rs by harboring an unauthorized occupant, and said that if I did not remedy the violation within the deadline, they would initiate legal action in the appropriate court to remove said occupant and recover attorney fees. And then, this was the part that made my stomach twist. It said they reserve the right to contact local law enforcement to address any trespassing issues arising from continued occupancy by an unapproved individual. "They're threatening to call the police on me for living in my own house," Isla said, voice flat. "No," I said, "they're threatening to call the police on you for living in my house." The room seemed to shrink for a second. I imagined patrol cars pulling up, neighbors peeking through blinds, Isla standing on our front steps trying to explain to some officer why our own HOA was calling her a trespasser. "That trespass language is ridiculous," Penny said. "You're married, right? That means you definitely have the right to be there. It's his property." "I think I'd like to talk to an actual attorney who's not being paid by Lorraine," Isla said quietly. So that's what we did. The next morning, I took a break between calls with clients and started phoning every real estate attorney in the area whose website mentioned HOAs. Most were too busy or didn't want to mess with small HOA disputes. Finally, I found one. A woman named Maribel who did property law and had a section on her site about abusive HOA enforcement. I emailed her the letter, the covenants, everything. She managed to squeeze in a phone consult that afternoon. I put her on speaker so Isla could listen. "Okay," Maribel said after I walked her through the timeline. "The short version, they are absolutely overstepping. They have authority over certain use restrictions, trash, paint colors, that sort of thing. But they do not get to decide whether your spouse can reside in your home. They certainly don't get to demand you evict your wife with 48 hours notice. And calling law enforcement on her as a trespasser would be a misuse of emergency services." "So what do we do?" Isla asked. "First, you did the right thing by responding in writing and pointing out the lack of authority in the documents," Maribel said. "Second, I'd like to send a letter on my office letterhead. Sometimes that's enough to make these boards back off." "Will that cost a fortune?" I asked. "It will cost something," she said, "but not a fortune, no. I'll keep it limited. And I'll copy their attorney so there's a clear record. If they persist, we can talk about stronger options. An injunction, a complaint to the state agency that oversees common interest communities, maybe even a suit for interference with your property rights." We agreed. She promised to have a letter drafted by the next morning. I hung up feeling a mix of relief and dread. Relief that a professional thought we were in the right. Dread that this might not be enough to stop people like Lorraine. Because here's the thing about people drunk on tiny bits of power. Being told you're wrong doesn't always make them rethink. Sometimes it just makes them double down. That evening, right around sunset, I got a taste of how far Lorraine was willing to go. I was in the garage adjusting the shelves when I heard the faint crunch of gravel out front, followed by voices. One was male, sharp. The other was a deeper rumble I didn't recognize. I stepped out of the garage and saw a man in a polo shirt and khakis standing on my driveway. Clipboard, of course. Next to him was a taller guy in a security guard uniform, complete with a shiny badge that was very much not a police badge, but clearly meant to look like one from a distance. The man in the polo shirt turned when he saw me. He had neatly styled hair and that particular expression middle managers get when they're about to talk down to someone. "Can I help you?" I asked, staying on the concrete, keeping the car between us. "Rylan?" he asked like we were old friends. "I'm Brent. I'm on the Willow Ridge board. This is Rick from Community Patrol Services." He gestured to the security guard like I should be impressed. Rick nodded in a non-committal way, eyes scanning the property like he was on a mission. "What do you need?" I said. "We're here to do a compliance check," Brent said. "We've had reports of unauthorized occupancy and parking violations at this address, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to resolve things amicably before we have to escalate." "I'm not interested in a surprise inspection," I said. "If the board has concerns, they can address them in writing through their attorney. We have counsel now." Brent's eyebrows went up a fraction. "Counsel? You hired a lawyer over a simple application?" "I hired a lawyer because you demanded I evict my wife from our home," I said. Rick shifted his weight. I couldn't tell which side he was on or if he cared at all beyond his shift ending on time. "No one's trying to evict anyone," Brent said in the tone of someone who's absolutely trying to do just that. "We're just asking for basic information so we can keep the community safe. You know how it is these days." "Actually," I said, "what you did was put evict the unauthorized occupant in a letter. I still have it." Brent's smile tightened. Words can be misinterpreted. "Look, why don't you just have your wife come out so we can confirm who she is and explain the process to her? Then we can all move on." I thought about Isla, inside cooking dinner, not expecting a confrontation on the driveway. I thought about the word confirm coming out of this stranger's mouth like he had any authority over who was in my house. "No," I said. "You're not talking to my wife. You're not coming in my house. If you have questions, you can send them to my attorney." Brent's face went a little sour. He glanced at Rick as if expecting backup. Rick looked at him, then at me, then at his shoes. "We're trying to handle this informally," Brent said. "If you insist on being uncooperative, the board will have no choice but to take further action." "Then take it," I said. But this conversation is over. I turned and started back into the garage. Behind me, I heard Brent say, just loud enough for me to catch it, "We can always call." Something in his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I paused inside the garage, hidden by the door, and listened. Brent and Rick stood on the driveway for another minute. I heard shuffling, the crackle of a radio, the faint beep of a phone unlocking. I went inside and told Isla what had happened. "They're not done," she said. "You saw his face. He's not used to people telling him no." "I know," I said. I hope they're not actually stupid enough to call the police." We were both wrong. They were exactly that stupid. The next day was the official end of their made-up 48-hour deadline. I'd gotten a copy of Maribel's letter to the board and their attorney that morning. It was beautifully worded, full of phrases like ultra-virus actions and bad faith enforcement and potential liability, and it explicitly warned them that any attempt to involve law enforcement in a civil HOA dispute would be a misuse of public resources. I printed it and stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Around 3 in the afternoon, Isla went out back to water the herb garden she'd planted along the fence. I was in my office, on a video call with a client whose audio kept cutting in and out, when I saw movement through the front window. 2 patrol cars rolling down the street slowly. My stomach dropped. I muted my mic, told my client I had an emergency and would email them, and ended the call. By the time I got to the front door, the cars had stopped in front of our house and were blocking the driveway. One officer was stepping out of each. Behind them, I could see Brent standing on the sidewalk, talking animatedly and pointing at our house. Next to him was Lorraine, her arms crossed, expression tight with indignation. My heart started hammering, but I forced myself to breathe and think. They were just people. They were responding to something they'd been told. I had the deed, the letters, Maribel's email. I'd done nothing wrong. I opened the door before they could knock. "Afternoon," I said, voice surprisingly steady. "Can I help you, officers?" The taller of the two stepped forward. His nameplate said C. Jensen. "Are you Rylan?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "This is my home." He glanced back at Brent and Lorraine, then at his partner. "We got a call about a possible trespasser and domestic disturbance at this address," he said. "Can we come in and talk?" Behind Jensen's shoulder, Lorraine caught my eye. The satisfaction on her face was unmistakable. A domestic disturbance. My palms went cold. Calling about trespass was one thing. Throwing domestic into it was something else entirely. "No, you can't come in," I said carefully. "But I'm happy to talk to you out here. And I have documents that might clear this up." Jensen's partner, a woman a little shorter than him with a nameplate that read M. Ramirez, stepped slightly to the side, taking in the front of the house, the open blinds, the mailbox, everything. "Is everyone inside okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "My wife is in the backyard. I can call her up if you'd like." "You said your wife," Jensen said. "What's her name?" "Isla." He glanced at Brent again. Brent said something I couldn't hear. Lorraine leaned in, gesturing. "Sir," Ramirez said, eyes flicking between me and the HOA delegation. "We're going to need to speak to your wife as well. You can ask her to come to the front door." "That's fine," I said. "I'll get her. Just give me a second." I closed the door, walked quickly through the house, and opened the sliding door to the backyard. Isla looked up from the basil she was trimming, squinting against the sun. "What's up?" "Police are here," I said. "HOA called, said there's a trespasser and a domestic disturbance. They want to talk to you too." For a second, her face was blank. Then a flush crept up her neck. "A domestic, what? Did they say anything else?" "Not yet," I said. "Just be calm. Tell the truth. We have nothing to hide." She took a deep breath, then another, and followed me inside. We opened the front door together. The officers were waiting on the porch, the HOA delegation hovering on the sidewalk like vultures at a safe distance. "Officers, this is my wife, Isla," I said. "She lives here, with me. This is our home." "Hi," Isla said, voice tighter than usual, but steady. "Is something wrong?" Jensen cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we got a call from your homeowners association stating that you were on the property without authorization and refusing to leave, and that when they tried to address it, there was yelling and banging inside the house. They were concerned for safety." "Yelling and banging?" Isla repeated. "I've been in the backyard talking to my plants." Ramirez's gaze flicked to Isla's hands, her clothes, like she was checking for signs of a struggle. There were none. Isla was in shorts and a t-shirt, a smear of soil on her knee where she'd knelt by the rosemary. "Look," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This is a civil dispute with our HOA. They sent us a letter demanding that I evict my wife within 48 hours because she supposedly isn't an approved occupant. We hired an attorney. She sent a letter telling them they have no legal authority to do that and warning them not to involve law enforcement. They decided to call you anyway, and apparently they decided to spice it up by adding domestic disturbance to try to get a faster response." Jensen's eyes focused on mine. "Do you have documentation of what you're describing?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I have the letter and the attorney's response. I can bring them out." "Go ahead," he said. "We'll wait." As I turned to go back inside, Lorraine called out from the sidewalk. "Officers, you should know they've been very aggressive about this from the beginning. We had to involve legal counsel for the safety of the community." Ramirez turned slowly toward her. "We'll talk to you in a minute, ma'am," she said very politely. I retrieved the letters from the HOA nonsense folder, printed copies of Maribel's email, and brought them back outside. Isla stood beside me, chin tilted up, shoulders squared. Jensen took the papers and read them, flipping back and forth between the 48-hour notice and the attorney's warning. His jaw tightened around the margins of his mouth as he read. Ramirez stepped down off the porch and walked over to Brent and Lorraine. "Which one of you placed the 911 call?" she asked. Lorraine straightened. "I did," she said. "As president of the Owners' Council, it's my responsibility to act when there's a threat to the community." "What exactly did you tell dispatch?" Ramirez asked. "Word for word, if you can remember." "I said there was a domestic disturbance in progress and an unauthorized woman refusing to leave a residence," Lorraine said. "I heard shouting and banging from inside earlier when board member Brent and our security representative went to speak to the owner. We've been having ongoing issues with this person's compliance, and we're concerned for safety." Ramirez stared at her for a long moment. "So to be clear," she said, "you told 911 there was a domestic disturbance, but you never actually saw any physical violence." "There was yelling," Lorraine insisted. "Aggressive behavior. He slammed the door in Brent's face." "I closed the garage door," I said from the porch, unable to stop myself. The conversation was over. No one was yelling. Jensen looked up from the papers. "There's nothing in these documents that gives your association the authority to decide whether his wife can live here," he said, voice level but edged. "And this letter from their attorney explicitly told you not to call us for a civil matter." "That attorney is wrong," Lorraine snapped. "We have broad discretion, the safety of our residents, and I have broad discretion," Jensen cut in, "to determine when my time and my partner's time are being wasted." The air seemed to shift. "Ma'am," Ramirez said to Lorraine, "you understand that knowingly making a false report to emergency services is a crime, right? You told dispatch there was a domestic disturbance. We responded in emergency mode. We have 2 units tied up on this instead of somewhere else they might be needed." Lorraine's mouth opened and closed. "I believed there could be danger," she said. "We're just trying to protect property values. You don't understand what kind of element can creep in if we don't know who's living here." Ramirez's eyebrows shot up. "What element are you referring to?" "You know, Lorraine said, and that was somehow worse than if she'd said something explicitly ugly. This is our home, Isla said quietly from beside me. We pay taxes. We pay their dues. I moved in with my husband. That's all the element that's happening here. Jensen handed me back the papers. I'm sorry we bothered you, he said. There's clearly no emergency here. If the association continues to harass you through misuse of emergency services, you can file a complaint. I'd also strongly suggest you and your attorney look into reporting this call to the appropriate oversight board. We will, I said. Thank you, officers. They nodded, then turned to Lorraine and Brent. We're going to need to take a formal statement about the call you placed, Ramirez said. Please step over here. As they walked a few steps away, I could hear snippets. Told dispatch there was active violence on... No signs of disturbance. You were warned this was civil. Lorraine's voice rose, then dropped when she realized the rest of the street could hear. Neighbors were peeking out from behind curtains, stepping onto porches. Penny stood on her front stoop with her phone out. Not exactly filming, but not exactly not filming either. Harlan was on his porch, arms folded, watching like a man who had seen this coming. Isla exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. Hey, I said softly, you okay? I'm so mad I'm cold, she said. But yeah, I'm okay. They called 911 on me. On us. They did, I said. And they're about to find out that has consequences. That was the moment I decided this wasn't just about getting them to back off. It wasn't even about replacing them on the board anymore. It was about making sure they understood, in a way that would stick, that abusing power and weaponizing law enforcement against innocent people was not something you could do in the shadows and shrug off later. The HOA had started this fight. They had called 911. They had put evict your wife in writing. They'd given me 48 hours to get her out. Now it was my turn to start the clock on them. And I had no intention of giving them as much grace as they'd given us. The officers talked to Lorraine and Brent for a long time. Isla and I went back inside, mostly because I didn't trust myself to keep my mouth shut if I stood on the porch and listened. Through the blinds, I could see Penny still on her stoop, phone in hand. Harlan was leaning on his railing, watching like it was free cable. 10 minutes after the patrol cars left, there was a knock at our door. I tensed, but it was just Penny. She slipped inside, shut the door, and blew out a breath as Isla dropped into a chair. They called 911 and said there was a domestic disturbance, Isla said. I called our attorney, Maribel, and walked her through everything. The 48-hour evict your wife notice, the threats to treat Isla as a trespasser, and now the invented emergency. Claiming a domestic disturbance when there wasn't one could be a crime, she said. She promised a complaint to the police department, letters ordering the HOA to preserve records, and told us to write statements while it was fresh. In the covenants, I'd found a clause letting owners force a special meeting if enough of us signed a petition. It had felt theoretical before. Now, it was the plan. I printed signature pages and went door to door. Every knock turned up a story, bubbles, ramps, chalk, and the same line. I thought I was the only one. Within a week, we had more signatures than we needed. Word of the meeting spread. Meanwhile, the police opened an internal review of the 911 call. A city letter confirmed what we already knew. The caller had been cited for misuse of emergency services. The HOA's careful statement never named Lorraine, but nobody needed the name. At the special meeting, the clubhouse was packed. I held up the letter demanding I evict my unauthorized wife and told the room how the board tried to control who lived in my home and weaponized 911 when I refused. Neighbors shared their own run-ins. When the ballots were counted, the result was clear. The entire board was recalled and replaced with me, Penny, and Harlan. Under the settlement that followed, the association's insurer covered our legal fees and the HOA adopted limits. No calling law enforcement over rule violations without a real threat, protection for spouses living together, disability accommodations, and a ban on anyone who misuses 911 from serving on the board. We hired a new management company and set up an appeals process. Every owner got a sheet titled, "What They Can't Do." Life under the new board is boring. Kids draw chalk, Harlan's ramp stays, basketball echoes at dusk. We still have rules, but now we also have boundaries. And a reminder that our homes aren't just lines in someone else's binder. The HOA gave me 48 hours to evict my wife. Instead, they lost their power and the illusion that a letterhead lets you run someone's life. I kept my home, my marriage, and the certainty that next time we'll all push back sooner. Friends, thank you. See you soon.